Amy Palmer, are you able to hear me? Are you able to speak?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
You want to get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay. Okay. Well, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Deb Delvecchio Scully, the presenter for this webinar. She is a licensed professional counselor. She is a nationally recognized trauma expert and holds diplomat status in the treatment of trauma. She has worked extensively with the Sandy Hook community and has done consultation regarding 9/11 and Parkland. And without further ado, I introduce Deb. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And so that was Amy Palmer, my most brilliant business partner. And so thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really happy to be with you, and hoping that in sharing some of my experiences in working with the Sandy Hook population for over 4 years and being the clinical recovery leader there, working in the Sandy Hook Elementary School, I have a particular understanding of what communal trauma is, and also through my consultation work with the MSD population and many therapists there, and also Orlando after the Orlando Pulse shooting. Hopefully that I will have some information that can help us all kind of navigate on from and through this pandemic we find ourselves in. Just a couple of kind of housekeeping things. One is, of course, I'm working from home and I don't have any kids to shush, but I have a noisy husband, and I have reminded him, but we'll see what happens. We're just going to be flexible and go with the flow. And the other thing is that I've got Amy Palmer is monitoring the chat. I am not going to be paying attention to that, so I'm not going to be responding to questions in real time. And but there will be times for questions. We'll take moments to pause, and at the end as well. So feel free to go ahead and put your questions there, and I'll do my best to kind of address the main themes. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I guess I woke up on Sunday feeling really very familiar feelings that I used to have when I was working every day in Newtown. It was very familiar to me. It was a heaviness. It was just such a reminder of what life was like then. And as I was out walking, it really came to me like that we are all in this together, and there's an easier path, and perhaps I can help be a guide for you on it. A little bit more about the work that Amy and I do. Our business, the Center for Neuropotentials, located in Brantford, Connecticut, and we're a brain-based practice. We primarily offer EMDR, CBT, DBT, expressive arts, mindfulness. Amy and I are both certified, board certified in neurofeedback, and she's a neuropsychologist. Take a moment, take a picture of the screen. This is how you connect with us. We are on several different social medias, and we're really amping up our presence there to keep giving everyone, our clients, the general public, and each other, a hand up during this time. Okay. Amy talked about kind of my background. I've been a therapist now for almost 20 years. And for those who are out of Connecticut, don't know where Brantford is, at the time of 9/11, I was actually working in New Haven, which is where Yale University is located, about 2 hours from Newark. And several years later, took a position in Fairfield And that's when I really started to see this overwhelming, lingering trauma as a result of 9/11. So back then I was stretched, as we're all being stretched, to really step up, to learn, to do the best that we can in these situations. A couple of lessons learned. Number one is that we're being stretched personally and professionally while living through a pandemic. I don't think we can say that enough in terms of what our self-care needs to be, and also how we need to up-level our skills. We are really being called to elevate. And at that time, we really had this ethical responsibility, ethical mandate to provide the most appropriate treatments at the right time to help people in the most effective ways. And I'm going to come back to that later on. And we also have an ethical and moral mandate to address our own personal traumatic reactions. So today I want to focus on 4 key areas. 1, what can we do collectively to flatten the curve of the mental health tidal wave that's building right now? 2, what to expect? 3, ways to elevate your therapeutic skills. And finally, self-care and resilience. So I really want to stay tight on the scope of what I can cover today, but I felt like I needed to show this slide because it's a really good visual of what we see after communal traumas. The one thing that I'll say is that I feel like the timing that's on the bottom isn't accurate. And what we cannot know is how long recovery will take. That's the unknown. But I will say that I think that right now we're kind of here in the really in the disaster impact phase, seeing that kind of heroic behavior absolutely from the medical professionals, the first responders, from the mental health community. But it's not a true authentic response just yet. There's more that we need to go through in order to really break down and heal. And so what we'll see is that we're moving into this kind of honeymoon phase and a time where we will really come together. Our work is not only to flatten the curve of responses, but to help kind of shrink this deep dive that unfortunately I think many are going to move into. There's several things about communal trauma that are important to know. It changes the fabric of the world, and ultimately it changes all of us. Our worldviews are altered. Basic beliefs can be challenged. We're really struggling with social isolation, being away from people that we're used to seeing every day at work, our families. Yes, we're in this together, but 6 feet apart. This time of such a enormous communal trauma has really brought forth unexpected and unwanted change on many levels, on an emotional level, physical level, our finances, our work lives, there's change. The one thing that is true and consistent is that everything is different, right? I look out my window, my backyard looks the same, but everything out there is new and different. Our stress reactions are much higher than normal, than usual. A disordered mood. When I was thinking about this, I didn't want to write mood disorder because the truth is all of our responses are somewhat normal right now, as are those of the clients, the people that are called to us. It's more that everything is disordered. And to some degree, everything that's coming to us is is normal, right? It's a normal response to really abnormal circumstances and situations. The grief and the heaviness of the grief, I think, is probably one of the biggest challenges for all of us. And there are many different types of grief, right? There's complicated grief, where we feel trapped and stuck. Traumatic grief, where the circumstances were sudden and unexpected. Um, and then there's a disenfranchised grief for everyone who's had any kind of loss. And it could be unrelated to COVID. In fact, we've had a death in our family completely unrelated to COVID. And the secondary grief for being unable to mourn in the way that is normal within my family. We haven't been able to gather. We haven't been able to hug one another and see one another. And so it creates this kind of different level of grief that we've seen before with major communal trauma. Certainly we saw that after 9/11 for those families that didn't have remains to bury. With certain, religious beliefs who need to conduct their religious services immediately, it becomes very confusing and very conflicting. And the issue here is that we are all in this. We have all suffered some, but some have given all. And the challenge is that our clients expect us to show up for them, to be present for them, and to give them the best of what we have to offer, all while many are learning how to educate their children from home. We've had to navigate as therapists transitioning to 100% telehealth for most of us. I know that's different throughout the country. We have to figure out the billing, and there's the burden of, am I going to get paid for this? That's a true reality. Having to transfer and create a home office or workspace. Right now I'm in my dining room. And I personally am really finding this week hit me harder than previous weeks. This was week 5 of telehealth. And, I'm finding like that I really want to be back in my office. I want to be with my team. I want that camaraderie. And so I'm struggling with that a bit. I'm sure all of you are as well to some degree. So it is stressful. It's confusing. It's creating inner conflict. It's exhausting. And for many, many, it's just an overwhelming time. And so, what do we call this, right? It's such a confusing time for us as clinicians, kind of reestablishing our clinical practice and what can we transfer to online? What can't we transfer to online? What can we change? What can we add? How do we grow? And this is one of what feels like a million webinars that are out there. So for me, there's been information overload, and I've had to really step back and be really mindful and say, I've got what I need right now. And when I need more, I'll check back in, and maybe there'll be some other training that I'll want to do. For therapists, this is something that we call shared trauma. This might be a new term for you. It occurs when both the clinician, the therapist, and our client share a traumatic experience. And so this is true for all of us. We are all dealing with this right now. So if we think about taking this on the macro level, right, we're all experiencing the effect of the pandemic and the coronavirus and the multiple changes of wearing masks in public and gloves and masks when we go to the grocery store. everything seems to be drive-by pickup, drive-by waving, drive-by birthdays. And so it's such a shared experience with our clients that kind of being able to step back and maintain that boundaries that we're used to is going to be quite different. I'll go into this a little bit more in a moment. But this concept was kind of first noted around 9/11, and it really does present a very unique challenge for us as therapists to hold space for the client while we're having our own reactions. Now, we're skilled in doing that. We've been trained in doing that. We're trained in doing it when, the life event affecting the client isn't impacting us. But the truth is that we are all in this together. We are sharing this time. We're sharing all the changes. We're sharing the pain. We're sharing the social isolation. We're sharing it all. And so we have to figure out how to ride this wave. How can we be more resilient? This point, I think, is so important as clinicians for us to realize. It's, when we think about why are we so tired doing telehealth treatment, when essentially we're doing the same thing that we do every day in our office. And there's a few reasons. One of them being the shared trauma component, that we don't have the same separation. Perhaps it's a little bit more challenging to set the boundary of being that separated therapist when we're at home, right? There's rituals that I go through daily. Getting in the car to drive to work is that kind of tuning up for my day, and driving home is kind of turning off my day. Well, now I have to kind of gear up when I walk into my office. It's just down the hallway from my kitchen, and really turn off what's happening in my home. And for me, I think it's fairly easier because it's just me and my husband. But for you who have children, for you who have larger families, when you have, especially if you've got little ones who only have one volume, which is loud, it's really, really can be that challenge. Understand that shared trauma also makes us at higher risk for burnout and vicarious traumatization. So it's really, really important to think about your boundaries, how you're working with them, how you clear yourself before you start the day, and how you end the day. I can't emphasize this strongly enough. It isn't a question of if, but when you will be impacted. When you see yourself change in the way that you're delivering therapy. Their stories are our stories now. It's beyond the realm or boundaries we're used to. And with a shared trauma within this kind of communal world trauma, it's an ongoing demand. It's not as though it's one client that makes you feel this way. When we are dealing with this session after session after session, and we're dealing also with the persistent discussion around the uncertainty that coronavirus has introduced to us, which is a part of many sessions. It just gets harder and harder to ride that wave with people. And left unattended, you're going to start to develop some negative symptoms that you wouldn't normally have in response to working with your clients. One of my colleagues who became a really dear friend during my time in Newtown is Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. She is the author of Trauma Stewardship, which I would highly recommend you to. The book is dry. I will say the book is dry to read, but I believe there's an audio version in Laura's voice, and I would highly recommend that you get it and you start to listen to it. It's powerful. It was really powerful back then, but now in pandemic times, I think it has even more relevance. But this is one of my favorite quotes of hers, is that we are all stewards, not just of those who allow us into their lives, but our own capacity to be helpful. To me, this sums up that ethical and moral mandate that we have. We've got to be able to not only just show up because it's an appointment on our calendar, but to show up emotionally, physically, energetically. Everything we have, we need to bring into our sessions. So, how can we adapt? First and foremost, it's the understanding that we must function from and be grounded in growth mindset. That ability that we can change and we have the same power, the same influence that we've always had to inspire our clients to maintain, to continue to change. So at the core, I think of a healthy navigation through a communal trauma is at its core the ability to change. The first year that I was working full-time in Sandy Hook, I was trained in 3 different trauma modalities. That was a lot. I'm so grateful that I was able to, but it required a lot of growth in me to be able to take in that and be able to turn it into practice. Continuing to come back to kind of your own intention, your own personal mission statement for why you do this work, what's important for you, and regardless of how you practice, if you're on the front lines with chronically mentally ill, these times are particularly challenging. If you're handling a crisis line and you're hearing more and more and more suicide ideation, it's really challenging. But it's, I think, coming back again and again to your personal mission, your vision, and your intention of what we can do in that moment is, I think, just so vital. Elevate. We're all being called to elevate. Elevate our therapeutic skills, elevate our presence, elevate our ability to hold space for one another. We're just being called to elevate. And how we step in and receive that, I think it will have everything to do with how we flow through this. Because if we fight and aren't allowing it in, there's going to be inner conflict that will add to your stress. I think support. Can't say that enough. One of the most important things that we did during my time in Sandy Hook was to form a peer support group. And we met regularly, and I'm still close to many of the people that were in that group. And lots of times we just kind of talked about whatever was happening. We might review cases, but it was the coming together to share and kind of put aside our burdens temporarily that kind of refilled our well and allowed us to go back out and do what we needed to do. So support. Pair, professional, we're going to need each other, and we need to be able to be there for each other in order for us to all move through this in the highest possible way. And self-care. So I'm not talking about self-care in the way that maybe we used to think about it, like getting a manicure or getting a pedicure. I'm really talking about addressing how our central nervous systems and our brains are dysregulated by everything that I was just talking about, by the shared trauma experience, by the social isolation, by spending so much time on screens all day long. All of these things are causing such dysregulation in our central nervous system. Trauma causes dysregulation of your central nervous system in your brain. And so we're looking for regulating activities. And so few of those are anything that has a rhythm, right? Our brain operates by rhythm, right? Our brain waves have a rhythm to them. And so when they're a little bit out of whack, think about like a car that has a flat tire. The other three try to drive the car, but you really can't do that very well. So we've got to think about regulation. So movement, all kinds of movement is good. Walking, running, any kind of cardio is great. The other day, I had my earphones in and I ended a session, and a music just started to play in my ears. And so I took a little bit of a dance party in between my sessions. I just danced around. It was great. Got my energy flowing, my blood flowing. So it was great. Bilateral music, which is music that plays right, left, or binaural beats, are excellent for regulating in your brain. Slow rhythmic music that's scored specifically kind of just to lower your heart rate, also really good. Quieting, all kinds of quieting activities. When it's really busy, it can be hard to slow down, but it's when we need to do it the most. And so tapping the brakes, I often say to people, just tap the brakes, take a breathing space, things like yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, all wonderful for supporting the central nervous system. I'm also a certified yoga therapist, and I rely on so much from yoga as just part of my clinical practice. But even 5 minutes of holding a couple of postures will calm and regulate you in a way really, really quickly. Emotional regulation. One of the quickest ways to regulate your central nervous system and in your brain is by inhaling an essential oil that has chemical properties that will be calming to you. Because of brain chemistry and where the olfactory bulb is located right next to the limbic system, when you inhale an essential oil, within 20 seconds, it should start to impact your brain and your central nervous system and just start to bring it back down. And I'm sure you have plenty of other ideas and suggestions, and feel free to add them to the chat so everybody else can see them. All right, so back to this place of such uncertainty. How do we name where we are? So many times we're taught to look at things as stages, phases. This happens and this happens and this happens. Well, communal trauma is messy. It's not orderly. It doesn't happen neatly. We're back and forth and back and forth and up and down and all around. The one thing that I'll tell you for sure is that the only thing that is certain is that there's a great deal of uncertainty. So how do we name this then? Right. There was a post on Facebook this week, and the person who wrote it, I believe, was sincere and believed that this was true and accurate, is that no, we're in the crisis phase and we should only be doing psychological first aid. Well, so I disagree with this on a number of levels, right? Crisis is ongoing and we're moving on. Time is passing. Crisis is typically thought of as the first few weeks. Well, we've been at this for a while and we will continue to be at this. So not so much the crisis phase, but I'm wondering where you think we might be. Go ahead and put some answers up in the chat. Let me know what you think. Let me give you time to do that. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of all of the above. I'm seeing mixed, unknown. Yep, Rebecca, all of the above. Uh-huh. Okay, so I would say it is all of the above. And that is what's so unique about communal trauma, is that at any one point, somebody could be in crisis, or they may have moved on to an intermediate phase where the immediate threat is past and they're trying to integrate into their life, and then something happens and you go back into crisis. Or it's mixed because, let's say suddenly someone you love is diagnosed with the virus and you're in crisis again. So it's this very fluid, moving back and forth and back and forth. So I think it's all of the above, and it's any of the above, depending on the circumstances that you're in. So the million-dollar question, right? What works? I'm going to share with you what we found to be true, and the evidence has borne out from 9/11, from Katrina, from Hurricane Sandy, from the MSD shooting, from Sutherland, just again and again and again, because at its core, trauma is dysregulating to the brain. Brain-based therapies are exceptional for addressing this. And so it is a we talk about top down versus bottom up. Bottom up is what's most effective. So we have to engage in treatment that is very somatic, very body-based, and really understand how trauma impacts the brain and how can we really intervene, really looking at this from what we call a neurosequential model. Bruce Perry, another one of my mentors, again, blessed to meet him during my time in Newtown, and be able to sit one-on-one with him was phenomenal. He's got such an understanding of the brain and how we respond to trauma throughout, the lifespan. And so this combination of some sort of a brain-based treatment, and that could be a somatic-based treatment. EMDR, although I'm trained in many, many modalities, I consider myself to be an EMDR therapist, but I do integrate aspects of brain spotting and somatic-based therapy and expressive arts and yoga therapy and essential oils all together to get the best results that I can. And, CBT has a role once the dysregulated brain is calmed and the traumatic memory has been reprocessed. So I think there is a continuum of what we can use, but it's about using the right tool at the right time. And some of the things, some of the cases that have come up throughout the years, and communal trauma is so confounding in many ways to get our hands around because it's in a persistent state of change. But particularly now, this isn't the result of a single event that had a start and an end. This is an ongoing issue. And we have a role. We have ways to intervene, to interrupt current reactions so they don't escalate to becoming PTSD. And, in Sandy Hook, there was a great deal of EMDR used with the recent event protocol. So you're taking a piece. You're not taking the whole trauma. You're taking a piece of it. And you're not going to the history, and it can give a great deal of relief. Unfortunately, I think there is a great need by mental health therapists because we want to help. Like the desire to help is high, but the skill level has to match that. And often there was a mismatch, and there can be a mismatch. And that's the challenge that I put forward to all of you, is that it's our job to up level our abilities so that we don't worsen the problem. Part of my role in Sandy Hook was to work with individuals who were coming in to figure out what's next. What do I do now? I've done this therapy, I've done this, I've done this. What do I do? And I would find that even really skilled therapists were not using the best tools that they could use. And so my challenge to all of us is that wherever you're challenged, wherever there might be a stumbling block, if there isn't confidence, that you seek out really good consultation, supervision, support, and get the training that you need. Well, there is this tidal wave coming, I believe, starting to come already, for people who are going to need our services. They're going to come in waves. And so it's not everyone is going to show up on our door immediately. Many take a while before they can acknowledge what's happened. And I remember almost 10 years ago meeting the mother of someone whose son had died on 9/11. She was a social worker, started her own nonprofit, and she, educated me about how so many people are still stuck in 9/11. And all these years later, they're still showing up as though they just stepped into September 12th. So that's the thing we need to remember. How people move through with this will be very individualized. And one of my frustrating pieces is that people try, our clients try to get the best possible help they can get. And one example that I want to share with you is that I've been working with, for the past year, a gentleman who's a retired Connecticut State Trooper who responded to the Sandy Hook School, was one of the first officers on scene. And now it's been over 7 years. And I was the fourth therapist that he tried to work with, because the other therapists were mainly talk therapists. And again, it's that top-down, bottom-up model, right? All the talking in the world isn't going to make a dysregulated brain become regulated. It's actually going to make it more dysregulated. And with, when I asked him if it would be all right if I could share his story, he was like, yes, absolutely. I didn't know that I could feel this good. It was one of the things that he said to me. And for him, we used a combination of EMDR, neurofeedback, a lot of relational, a lot of time spending. He was so highly avoidant because he just went back and forth between being dissociative or flooded. He didn't know any other emotional states because he was so badly traumatized. And now I'm really, really proud to say that he's in so much better today than he's ever been. Right therapy, right time, right therapist. All of those things have come together. And he's really no longer symptomatic regarding Sandy Hook, which is phenomenal. When, we think about how do we elevate, right? How do we do what we need to do? You've got to just remember, I think, this key thing that is one of my major lessons learned is that there are 3 primary implications when it comes to trauma, and even more so communal trauma. The mind and body are stuck in a perpetual state of threat. And the brain can only see threat. It can't see anything else. Your brain is unable to filter information contextually. right? So there's a lot of distortion. And it results in a very deep impaired state of self and profound disconnection from the body. Dissociation is a common part of what trauma is. Don't let that scare you, because there's a big difference between dissociation that we see that was part of coping with trauma versus a true dissociative identity disorder. Right. And so what's next? Well, for all of us, it's training, 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 training. It is learning new skills, up-leveling your skills. If you are trained in EMDR, maybe you don't know about the recent event protocol or you need a refresher. Reach out and get that. I'm happy to give that to you. One of the things that really worked in Sandy Hook and also is really working in Parkland is the willingness for therapists to refer clients to another clinician who can do the trauma work. So it's very much like a primary care doctor who sends you to a specialist to get a single problem evaluated. That specialist treats that problem and you come back to your primary care doctor. We have to do this without fear of losing clients, right? Because it's what they're going to need to get better. If you don't self-identify as a trauma therapist, start to create a directory of therapists that you feel comfortable referring to, and talk about this. Be open and honest. I'm sending you this person to do EMDR. When that person's done, will you send them back to me? Of course I'm going to send them back to you. You know, that needs to happen. Give yourself permission to identify and recognize your needs as a therapist. We are human. We are trying to navigate a pandemic just like all of our clients, and we need to do it together. Seek out consultation and supervision. I still receive consultation. And I'm really fortunate that I have Amy right down the hall, and I have all of our other clinicians. We talk to each other all the time. It is such a way to continue to be the best at what you do. Reach out for your own treatment if it's needed. And remember to maintain a growth mindset. Amy Palmer, I think it's a good time to maybe open up for some questions.
Thanks, Deb. We did have a question from someone who noted that there's conflicting information out there as to the appropriateness of using EMDR on telehealth. So could you address that in your opinion?
Sure. Yes. So I'm aware of that conflict. EMDRIA is the organization that provides certification for EMDR. Initially indicated that that they didn't think it was appropriate. And since then, many things have changed. I think there have been a flood of trainings available to help us all transfer our practice online, because we don't really have a choice here. And I believe, so my practice is just about 100% EMDR. I have a few that I'm not doing that with. And I have easily transitioned to telehealth. And I had an ethical and moral responsibility to do that. We couldn't just stop treatment in the middle. So I think there are a few factors. One is your own confidence as a clinician to be able to do that. Getting training so that you feel comfortable, and that ongoing kind of consultation support to help you deal with whatever, you know, issues, questions, problems might arise. Amy, anything else coming up in the chat?
Sorry about that, Deb. Let me get the chat back open. Someone asked if you are using a light bar for the bilateral stimulation via telehealth.
All right, so I'm not going to get into, that's really outside the scope of what I can do here to talk about exactly how I'm providing EMDR online. I will say no, I don't use the light bar in my office and I don't use it in telehealth. Those kinds of questions are kind of outside the scope of what we can do today. But before we end, we'll talk a little bit about opportunities, ways that you can connect with this, some courses that we have, and how to work with me for consultation.
Yes, and we are getting questions about resources, and I think you'll be addressing that later as to where to get more information.
Yeah.
There's a question, what are your thoughts on how children will transition back to school in light of the climate?
Well, I think that, you know, this is going to vary state by state, right? So I'm in Connecticut, right next to New York. Our schools are out until May 20th. This is just my personal belief. I have no inside information. I do not think that kids will be going back to school this year. I don't think, I think they'll go back in the fall perhaps. There's still so much that's unknown that I know we want to jump ahead and be prepared from what might come next, but we can't. I think that is the single most important piece, is that we have to be right here, right now, present to what we have. I think kids are adaptable. Kids are resilient and will adjust if parents let them, if we can support them in doing that. Okay, anything else, Anne?
Sorry, I have to toggle back and forth to unmute myself. From your experience, what is the best way to deliver and support treatment to groups of people?
Well, I think that's an enormous question that's beyond the scope of what I can say here. I think it depends on who those groups of people are, what you're trying to do, if you're open coping, if it's coping skills, if it's a therapy group. So again, that's beyond the scope of what I can speak of.
Okay. And then we have another question about, do you have a favorite or most used grounding exercise?
Oh, I have so many that I love. Well, I happen to have an oil with me right here. This is a cortisol calm blend that I use. And for me, just taking a couple of deep breaths. And this is a really simple, kind of really soothing technique. And you just bring your hands together, palms together like this, and just slide them like this. Just invite everybody to give that a try. This is really calming. This is one of the tools that I'm using online very effectively. One of my clients does this while we're reprocessing because it's what helps him the most. So this is a simple, really easy one right there. And of course, the most basic grounding one is to remember to breathe.
Okay. Someone wanted you to address, we've flattening the emotional curve. We recommend decreased screen time, but yet people have to be on screens. So can you comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, it's hard. We're all struggling with that. So some things that you can do. One are to take frequent breaks. Even if it's a 2-minute break between sessions, to move away from the screen. There are some filters that you can put into place. There are even glasses that you can purchase that like a blue light filter. All of those things will help. but it's also what we're doing away from screens that matters. It's making sure that you're getting the cardiovascular exercise, that you're eating, that you're drinking. I know I have to be more efficient in remembering to drink because I forget. And the day's gone by and I haven't had anything to drink for several hours. Keeping your brain well fed and hydrated and getting the blood flowing is really important. In between sessions, like just, move around, do some jumping jacks, something like that. I've got a set of TRX bands set up, and in between I'll go out and I'll do a few rounds of that and then go back in. That all helps. And put your screens away. When you're done working, put screens away.
Thank you. I like this question here. As a new counselor, are there any good recommendations on getting some insight into compassion fatigue?
Yes, there are. And I think I'm going to be sending out an email that has this recording, and there are some links. I'm going to, Diana Castano, can you unmute yourself and just briefly talk about the work you've done with Kristen Neff and Richard Germer?
Yes. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Okay. And you can see me too?
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Yeah, well, this is kind of a whole topic that is very well known in the community of mindfulness and self-compassion. And it comes to how we as caregivers, because we ended up also burning out, and the urgency of being supportive of all the people affected kind of make us to enter into this mode of working and providing and giving and being available for everybody. And suddenly we kind of get disconnected of our own needs, and even sometimes feel guilty for recognizing that we might be tired, we might not be available for our clients the same way. And it's very important to be aware of that and to recognize and to take care of us first. Otherwise, we won't be able to be as good helpers and as effective as we might be. So it is a lot of the mindfulness component in terms of being aware and noticing when we're getting depleted, when we're getting overloaded, when our personal life is also kind of getting on the way, because now we have distancing, but we don't have a distancing from home, because now we're doing work and home in the same place and almost the same time. So it's very challenging. And mindfulness alone is not enough. If we don't add the self-compassion component, we will be kind of lost, because it is the quality of the attitude that we have towards ourselves when we are not as available. So pretty much all the practices that they recommend is being mindful, but bringing the kindness to ourselves and bringing that attitude of care and loving attention that we will give to a loved one. So this is something that we have to incorporate into our practices daily.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm just going to pause questions. I know several people need to move on at noon. We can stay on longer for answering questions. I just wanted to go back and just finish up a few things. So lots of questions, lots of wanting to know about resources. We will be providing more and more resources and trainings. We have one program that's about to be released as soon as the CEs get approved, just waiting on that. And this is really going to talk about that communal grief component, taking a deep dive in the different types of grief, how to work with them, what's effective. And the second course that we have currently available is for the therapeutic aromatherapy for clinicians. CEs are approved, and so that's something that it's another way of self-care, caring for yourself. And we're updating the course to add a piece in on self-care for clinicians. And I will be providing consultation services. And so that can be right now individual consultation. If anyone is working towards EMDR certification, I can help you with that. Just general, how to live through this. How do I move forward as a therapist? What does that look like? Etc. All this information will come out to you in an email. And I know Amy Palmer, I'm going to ask you to put the link in the chat on the therapeutic aromatherapy course for everyone. Again, our contact information, if you didn't get it the first time, you can take a picture of this now. And okay, and so it's 11:57. We've got a few minutes before people need to rush off. Just for Amy, any other questions? I'm going to take a peek in the chat. Okay, how do we contact you for EMDR certification? I can bring that slide back up so you can see that. Yeah, it's interesting. I do think working remotely, there's an intimacy to it that's different from face-to-face. I've really seen and found that many of my clients are going deeper and than they ever have before. I don't know that I fully understand it, but I know that I've had many people. I'm just typing sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. Amy, can you just put my email into the chat, please? Thanks. Yeah, there's a depth to this and an intimacy. And I think it's something about that people are letting us into their home. And we're seeing pieces of them that we wouldn't ever see. And to some degree, they're coming into my home. So I do think that there's an intimacy about that that's different. Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of questions about EMDR protocol, blah, blah, blah. Happy to get you whatever you need. If you send an email. And I think that, what we can do on our website, centerforneuropotential.com, is just to create a page for some of these resources that are being asked about. There are a lot of meditations happening that are free for people. And yeah, so we can do that. All right. Leslie Blatt. Ha! She was my clinical supervisor when I was a student. So glad to have you here. Any other questions? Anything that we didn't touch on?
One person did ask if you integrate yoga with your telehealth.
I do. So much of yoga is really the breath work, and I do integrate that regularly.
Okay, great. I think we got all of the questions. There were some about resources, but that's something that we'll get up on our website or email out to people. So I think those are all the questions from the chat.
Okay. There's more coming in.
Well,
Let's just see.
A lot of thank yous.
Yeah.
Which is great. And I think everyone in the chat has been wonderful. Everybody's been sharing resources with each other, just really a supportive community that's been on this webinar. So that's been really cool to see.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. The one last message that I'll leave you with, and I meant to upload this photo and I did it, but I'm going to go in and put it up on social media. The one thing that's been really helping me is that my cousin texts me every day with an inspirational something. And today she sent me a photo that her brother took from New Jersey. On Wednesday, we had really violent storms here all day. And from his balcony, looking into New York City, there was a giant rainbow over the city. And it's such a message of hope. And, when I think about one of the key messages for me throughout all of my training is from Irving Yalom and the installation of hope, and how we have this dual response of, right, we have the responsibility to install hope for our clients, and then they install it for us. And I think we cannot forget that in these days, but to continue to find ways to look for the light, to look for the hope. And so if you're on Twitter, Amy Gallagher, one of my clinicians, wrote, she tweeted the picture for me this morning. So go find it, find us on Facebook, Instagram. We're just posting whatever tips and things that we can come up with. And let's just continue to support each other as a community. And we're going to get there together. Okay. Bye, everybody.